So our next speaker is author Jonathan Fields. For those of you that participated in our event last year, Jonathan was one of our keynote speakers. And what we love about his work is he really understands how to help us understand who we are and how to best tap into and unlock our full potential. So after last year's event, Jonathan and I stayed in touch. We had a lot of conversations around the passion that was in the room, the audience, specifically the questions that were being asked, the level of engagement, and how important it was for us to solve for housing. And we were able to connect back to Jonathan's family and his kids graduating from college and kind of entering into that space as well and understanding how difficult it was to kind of find attainable housing, whether it be here or anywhere in the country. So through those conversations, we developed kind of a tailored session for this audience, which I'm excited for Jonathan to share. So with that, I'm going to bring Jonathan Fields up and let him run with it.
Thank you. It's been so inspiring being here. I was here last year to hear the conversations. That last session on AI was just, I've gone so deep down into the AI rabbit hole over the last 18 months. I don't know if anyone else has really been adopting it. It's incredible, amazing, terrifying all at once. And we are just, we're at the very, 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 very beginning of everything here. So, it was interesting. Earlier, Dehan shared a statistic that I really locked into. And that was that of everyone who sort of responded to that survey, that some 75% of organizations had a dedicated R&D and innovation team or division. I'm really curious, of everyone in this room right now, if you have a dedicated team or division or group specifically for innovation, just quick show of hands. I'd be really curious to know. Okay. So part of the question there is, and who do you rely on to innovate? And here's the other thing that really jumped out at me at that number. So 75% sounds amazing, and we're devoting energy to this thing. But the bigger number I'm curious about is in the context of your entire organization, all of your employees, whether you have 10 or tens of thousands, what percentage of all of your employees are actually empowered, given permission to, and then given the personal tools to support themselves as they contribute to an innovation process? Right? My guess is that probably 5 to 10% of the total employees of any organization, even of those who have dedicated teams to innovation, are actually dedicated. What about the other 90 to 95%, right? Why are we not looking to them? Why are we not inviting them into the innovation process? Whether it's somebody who's working on a line somewhere, somebody who's working in an office, somebody who's working on a computer. This is the thing that I'm curious about, right? How do we empower everybody at every level of the organization? Not just the teams who we say, you are anointed to innovate for us, to actually say yes to this process. Because what often happens when we create siloed innovation teams or groups is that we rely on them to create the big ideas, to develop them. And then when they go out, and then somebody else has to execute on them, has to operationalize that in the field, everything falls apart. And there's a reason for this. And it's probably not the reason that you're thinking about. And part of the reason is because innovation can be personally brutalizing to people who are not equipped with the tools to support themselves through the process. That is where a lot of my focus is. That's where a lot of my work is. I'm looking at how does innovation impact the individual? How do we not only empower them to do this really important work, but how do we give them the tools so that they do not fall apart through it? So let's kind of zoom the lens out a little bit here and just talk more generally about the process innovation. We're uncertain times right now, but it's always uncertain times. Yes, there are things we can't control, but that's always going to be the case. The knee-jerk reaction for most people is to play it safe. The very fact that you're in this room right now tells me that you are the outliers. You are the outliers, which is amazing because you're driving industry forward. Outliers also tend to have an interesting quirk, which is they think everybody else is like them, and they're not. So when an outlier who is a leader in an organization brings their innovative, big ideas to the organization, most people who are not them or their immediate teams tend to freak out. So a lot of what tends to happen, probably outside this room, when we're faced with uncertainty, is that we start to play it safe, right? We pull back. But what we know about any industry, this one included, is that the world applies friction, right? There is no sideways in any kind of industry, right? We're either growing or we're shrinking. There is no such thing as stasis in business. It doesn't exist because the natural state of every industry is friction. And if we are not exerting some sort of activation energy to resist that, then we will be shrinking. There's no just coasting. Anyone who has been in business for more than 18 months knows this. We've got to constantly be working to grow, to innovate even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So what does that actually mean? How do we actually do the process of innovation? I love to sort of look at these two different examples of scale when I think about this. We'll start on a more personal level. This is something Dennis and I have sort of chatted about over the last couple of months. It's something that's been popularized, I think, in this country, especially over the last couple of years. The word misogi, it comes actually from Japanese, where the original intention was it's sort of a personal cleansing ritual. You know, this is something where people would actually stand under brutally cold water, from a waterfall and cleanse. It's kind of been taken over and popularized in this country now to mean something a little bit different. But the original intent, I think, is still there. This is about something that most people say, this is something I do once a year. And it has to have at least a 50% risk of me not being able to complete that. You can't have, oh yeah, I'm gonna do it, it's gonna be hard, but I know it's gonna happen. You have to have 50% risk of failure. It has to be deeply personal to you. This can't be something that somebody else tells you you should do or it's appropriate to do for who you are at this moment in your time or life. It's got to mean something to you. And the reason is because the net effect is when you succeed, if you succeed, it will be transformational. It will change you. Now, if I throw out, I'm curious whether anyone in this room actually is familiar with this sort of ritual or exercise. Raise a hand if anyone is, or is this entirely new? Dennis, you're the one. So you might think about, maybe I'm going to train to run a 10K. We're in Colorado. Maybe I'm going to actually, with a friend, we're going to work out. We're going to go climb one of the 60-plus 14,000-foot peaks in this state, right? I have a friend who actually has climbed all 61, and he's in his late 60s. So for me, actually, one of mine from last year was I'm a writer. I generally write to a popular audience. My daughter, as Dennis mentioned, graduated college last year. And I wanted to do something really special. So I spent a huge amount of time. I literally took a 1-month sabbatical from my work, and I run 2 different companies. I told my teams I don't exist for all intents and purposes. And the goal was I wanted to write a book for only one person to read. I wanted to write a book for my daughter, to my daughter, sharing things about me, sharing observations that I noticed about her, so that when she graduated college, which was a tough time to actually be going through college during the pandemic especially, I could say, here, I made this for you. I didn't know if I could pull it off. So I took that time and I worked probably harder than I've ever worked on any book I've ever written, knowing that literally only one person will ever read this book. And that summer when she graduated, I was able to hand it to her. And that changed me, and we'll see if it changed her over time, right? So this is the way that it often shows up at a personal level. But now let's sort of scale out a little bit, and let's talk about enterprise levels. Anyone familiar with Jim Collins' work? Right? So I actually live in Boulder, Colorado, where Jim lives. He wrote a book a chunk of years ago called Built to Last. And in that book, he popularized this coin people shorthand as BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals. And what he realized is that many of the biggest companies who've been around for generations and become enterprise scale and had stunning impact, really changed the face of not just industry, but humanity, the way that people live. They had these things called BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals, and he deconstructed these 5 elements of what is in that. So what we first have is it's got to be catalytic. It has to bring everybody together with a sense of purpose. Like, we're all in this together. We got to be where it's going to catalyze them to come and work in a group. It also needs to be audacious. This can't be incremental. So we're not talking about a 5% improvement on something, right? It also has to be long-term. Generally, we're talking about a 10 to 30-year horizon. This entire industry is built on that right now. The single biggest thing that everybody in this room is trying to solve is not going to be solved in less than 10 years. Maybe 30 years, but this is really big, and that is part of what has to be a part of these things called BHAGs. It also has to be easily understood. You can't have to have somebody wade through 10 pages of documentation to understand the simplicity of this vast transformational goal. And the last element is it also has to contain some element of being externally focused. So it can't just be about, in 10 years, we're going to 10x our bottom line. It has to be more like, in 10 years, we're going to 10x the volume of affordable housing across the entirety of this country, right? Is that going to benefit the organization? Sure. But it's also going to create something bigger than the organization for people to buy into that refers back to what will be catalytic, that gives people a sense of purpose. So I look at these 2 kind of models of innovation, personal innovation and also enterprise-level innovation. What are the common threads? It's got to be transformational. It's got to be high stakes, and here's the killer one. It's got to be uncertain. It has got to be uncertain. So one of our companies, actually, Spark Endeavors, we build tools to help people really figure out how to make work one of the best parts of their life. And first 5 years, we're about 5 years old now, 6 years actually, we figured out how to do this for close to 1 million people now. And now we actually know how to accelerate that, so we can probably make that number 1 million a year at this point. So in 10 years, right, that means we could probably affect 10 million people's lives. Pretty cool, right? Is that compelling? Sure. Is it audacious? Sure. Is it uncertain? Not really. We kind of have that dialed in at this point. Would it be hard? Take resources and effort? Yeah. So we decided to actually say, well, what would happen if we 10x'd that vision? What would it actually do? And what you see, and this is why these are so powerful, is it changes the way that you make decisions for every single thing that comes across your desk for the next 10 years. Because the decision to get you through a fairly certain path to 10x is profoundly different than what it would take to get you to 100x in that same amount of time. It changes the psychology of decision making. Now, a lot of what we tend to do, even when we're driven by innovation, we say yes to innovation, is we say, okay, we got to innovate, we got to grow, we have to do new things, and we have to empower people in our organization to actually be on board with this thing. But we've got to manage the risk. We can't just be insane, we can't just spend on all these different things, we've got to be realistic and manage the risk. Is that important? Yes, of course, right? We need to actually try and make sure that the entity sustains itself. And at the same time, Roger Martin, the former dean of the Rotman School of Management, is famous for saying, the 2 most dangerous words to innovation are prove it. Anything that is truly innovative, anything that holds the potential for transformation, cannot be proven before you do it. Because if it could, you would be replicating something, not creating something, not innovating. And that's not what this is about. What we know is that uncertainty and possibility, they're 2 sides of the exact same coin. When we try and minimize the downside, what we're saying, we want to minimize uncertainty. But what we do is we unwittingly minimize possibility. You cannot become more certain about something without also eliminating the amount of truly innovative potential that you're saying yes to. The more certain you are, the less innovative it will be, the less transformational it'll be, the less impact you will have. So we have to learn how to grapple with that. Some of you may be really good at that. In this room, you're probably better than most. Most people are not. What tends to happen for most people is there's this secret saboteur that pops up with them. What does that look like? Well, here's sort of a universal truth. Any idea that holds the potential to transform the future will also rattle, sometimes terrify, those whose responsibility it is to make it happen, sometimes even including the very people who've come up with the idea. I have experienced this. I've started a number of companies. I run 2 right now. We're about to go into a major growth phase and take a whole bunch of risks. I'm coming up with the ideas that are leading this. My team is on board with it. Does it rattle me thinking about what we're about to say yes to and resource? Yeah, it does. And this is what I do for a living, right? Problem is, when we don't acknowledge this, we just say, here's what we're doing, here's where we're going, come up with all sorts of great ideas, and then we sort of like give it to the people to go and execute on. And then we wonder why nothing happens the way we want it to happen. It's because innovation changes the psychology of action taking if we do not equip people to handle it in the right way. So it requires you to step into the abyss, to actually be in a space where you're allocating resources, you're making decisions without knowing how it's going to end. We actually have fMRI studies, functional magnetic resonance studies on the brain for people who are actually put in this position, where they're saying you have to make a decision, you have to take action, and you don't have enough information to know if it's right or not. You have to actually make this decision in the face of uncertainty. When we do this, part of our brain called the amygdala starts to light up. That is the fear center in the brain. That triggers what we all learned in high school, the classic fight or flight response, now also known as fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? It sends chemistry coursing through our body that literally makes us physically uncomfortable, sometimes to the point of feeling ill. We do not like this feeling. So this process of us stepping out into that space, if we are not one of the, like maybe 1% of humanity who's just naturally okay in that space, can be devastating to us and to all of the goals and the things that we want to make happen in our organizations. It tends to lead us to do one of 3 things. The first thing that it leads us to do is a race to the end. I got to do this thing. We have a big vision, right? We're all kind of on board with this, but the truth is most people aren't on board with it. They're just not telling you they're not on board with it because this is what we're all supposed to be here to do. So one of the big things that we see happen is they get it, and instead of taking their time, being methodical, considering things, working at a good pace, but actually really being thoughtful about what they're doing. Because the feeling of being in the space of having to make decisions, take action, and being responsible for an outcome or deliverable is so uncomfortable for most people that one of the big reactions is they'll race to the end really quickly. Is that a bad thing? Well, often yes. Because what happens when you just keep picking up the pace and picking up the pace and picking up the pace? What happens if you tell somebody we need to actually take this development or project or home, right? Or maybe you're actually a manufacturer and you're creating parts. Maybe you're like a firm, an architecture firm, and you're actually creating the CAD designs. What happens if you actually tell the people responsible for implementing this, we have half the time to do this, right? They start racing really, what do they do? What do? Do you expect that the product of what they inevitably create is going to be as good? What do you think? No. You cut corners. You put blinders on. You ignore all sorts of potential opportunities to make this thing better than even the initial plan or goal or vision was because you just want to get out of this feeling faster. This is what happens in business all day, every day, because we don't equip people to understand how to be in this space and breathe and be okay. The second reaction we see on a regular basis is they backpedal. They take we get 10% into this. We're like, oh, things are kind of going. And then all of a sudden we're like, I don't know. The stakes are getting higher. Generally, the further you get into a project, the higher the stakes get. More resource allocation. You're further into it. More labor involved. More debt potentially, right? So as the stakes rise, somebody starts to go, oh, maybe we didn't make the right decision here. I'm not so sure right now. Now, if what's happening is as you get into the project, fact is replacing assumption, and that fact objectively is telling you this was not a good idea, that's one thing. It's important to know that and then make an intelligent decision. But what most of the time happens is somebody gets there and their psychology and physiology is telling them, I can't handle this, I can't handle this, I can't handle this. As the stakes go higher, the discomfort goes higher, the anxiety goes higher, the stress goes higher. So they start to question the decision that made them say yes to it in the first place. And they come up with all sorts of rationalizations to back away, to pull out of it. When this thing is equally capable of becoming amazing and yielding amazing outcomes if they had just been equipped to stay in the process. The third reaction is they just freeze. They just stop acting. I've done all three of these, by the way, even in the position of being a founder and a CEO. Right? And I have so many practices and tools in my tool belt. This is part of what happens to us as human beings as the stakes rise and we don't have the information that we want. We literally just stop. We can't figure out whether to move forward or whether to back, so we stop deciding. And when we do that, everything that's on the line stops too. It all freezes. And as leaders, we often look at that person who either is racing to the end or we see them rationalizing to backpedal, or they're just completely paralyzed. And we think something's wrong with them. There is nothing wrong with them. They're having a perfectly normal human response to this situation. What is wrong is that we, who create the culture, have not equipped them with the tools, the skills, and the practices to learn how to be in this space and continue to function and thrive. That's on us, not them. And oftentimes, we don't have those skills either. So we don't even know what to teach them. So the biggest barrier often, it's not the lack of a big idea. Right? There's so many different ways to actually brainstorm, to come up with the big ideas right now, from like classic brainstorming to ideation to design thinking to anonymous brainstorming, which actually is a fantastic technique, by the way, if nobody uses that. It's also not resources. It's not that resources are not a barrier, but they are generally a solvable problem, right? The bigger thing in my mind is that we have an impossibility mindset. We don't have the tools that we need to actually do things. Well, people say, well, what about motivation? Can we just motivate them to go do the thing? Hey, listen, I know you're stuck, right? I see that you're kind of frozen, you're not making good decisions, or you're like a little bit fearful or concerned. It's okay, it's gonna work out, we're gonna be great. So you put on the motivational thing. It doesn't work. Has anyone actually tried to do that with somebody or a team or a group and you're like, they're kind of like, they seem like they're going off the rails a little bit or they're falling behind in this endeavor. And you're like, all right, we gotta motivate them. Or you tell the leader, the manager of that team, you gotta motivate these people, right? So they go in, they do the rah, rah, rah. How long does that last? 3 minutes? 5 minutes? If you're really lucky, like through the lunch break? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Motivation is a hot minute thing, right? It doesn't get the job done because we are not fundamentally changing the psychology of the experience. So what do we need to do? What we really need to do is think about how do we equip ourselves and our teams with more of a possibility mindset so that we can be in this space and actually be okay, but not just be okay, be effective when things get hard, when the stakes rise, when the uncertainty is relentless. So we can transform uncertainty into fuel for action and innovation. So how? So I want to share just 5 ideas with you. And we'll move through them fairly quickly. And then I'll just open it up for Q&A after that so anyone can sort of like bounce anything you want off of me. So think about these. We're going to start, the first couple are more of a strategy/culture level. So I've been doing this for the better part of 15 years right now. And there is a massive toolbox and set of practices that we can pull from. These are 5 fairly straightforward and 5 what I would call big levers in this experience. So on a strategy, on a culture level, we talk about normalizing uncertain action. Now, sometimes we'll do this on that team, right? Dehan shared, like, there's that team of people who are designated R&D and innovation people. And for them, We normalize uncertain action. You guys, you can do this. You can take risks, come up with crazy, wild ideas, right? But we actually don't tell them that they're going to be okay personally in their careers, in their work, in their lives, in their trajectory, if they keep coming up with ideas that don't really prove out, right? And then if you move beyond them, what about that 90 to 95% of the other people, where if we invited them into the innovation process and said, you not only have permission to think about how things could be changed, could be better, could be different, we want you to do that. And we actually want to normalize this for you. How do we empower them so they're okay? What we know is that when you feel like you're the only one in the room who's taking risks, who's actually out there making decisions and taking action in the face of high-stakes uncertainty, you freak out. When you feel like most people around you are doing the same thing, it becomes a much more easeful experience because you were all in it together. Not that you're even working on the same project. We see this in companies all over the place. They're the classic companies, like 3M's 15% time, which is endured for literally generations right now, where 15% of your time can be allocated towards these kind of moonshot, crazy ideas, things that just try and do. LinkedIn has these things called incubates, where you basically get 2 weeks to just take an idea and do something wild. Atlassian, massive company, right? They have these 24-hour sprints where anybody can just try these things. One of my favorite companies, Burden, like snowboarding company. Any snowboarders here? And skiers? Right. I'm a Colorado person, so it's in my blood. So they actually have a 10,000 square foot prototyping facility there, not to build things, but to break things and play and experiment. Like 95% of the things that they do are designed to not work. Everyone in there is empowered. So if you have 100 employees working in that prototyping facility, it's normalized. Risk-taking, action-taking, doing things, allocating resources and time, when you have no idea if it's going to work out, this is normalized. So you feel completely okay doing it. It makes a huge difference in the psychology of the experience. How do you do that? Take a team. Take a group. Like if you want to institute like a small, 1 day a month, just think about anything, crazy ideas that might be doing something cool, not just in your R&D and innovation groups, right? Because somebody who you think has no ability to give you input or is going to see something, who's literally sitting out there in the field doing some work, and they're going to be like, nah, this can be done better. And if you don't empower them to also have some of this time, your organization's innovation process will grind so much slower than it could potentially actually move. Second one is what we call chunking steps and stakes. This already happens a lot in the building process. Especially the way that a lot of people in this room actually do it. So we see this coming out of, if you're familiar with management philosophies like Kaizen or lean manufacturing, where instead of saying we're going to build this big new thing, we're going to create a whole new car or industry or product, they break it down into the smallest steps, and they go step by step by step by step by step. And then over time, as they think, oh, I'm getting feedback, I'm doing this thing, I'm getting feedback, I'm improving it. Doing the thing, getting feedback, I'm improving it. Now, it's fantastic for process optimization, for getting to a truly innovative, a groundbreaking product or outcome faster. But what it really does underneath the surface is it changes the psychology of action taking. So that now somebody isn't saying, oh, my job is to create this big, innovative, game-changing thing and it's all on me. They're like, no, I just need to actually create this next step. Tiny little step, and the stakes aren't that big. And we see this change the experience in a lot of different ways. The third thing is teaching people how to reframe their what-if story. So now we're drilling down from strategy to individual strategy. So from culture to what does a human being do? One of the things that you see consistently is that once somebody is in this place where they're working to really make something big and new and different happen, and they don't know if they can do it or if the thing is good enough or they're good enough, that they start to tell a what-if story. And the common story is, what if I fail? What if this fails? That becomes another paralyzing factor. That is the default mode for most people unless you give them another process. So here's the addition to that. We're not just going to tell them, what if I fail? That's an important question to ask. We're going to give them 3 more questions to ask. And if you're a leader or a coach or a manager in your organization, ask these to your people if they come to you or you see them spinning with the what if I fail question. And how will you recover? how will we recover? It's important to play that out. What if we succeed? What does that look like? And then the question that almost nobody asks, even if you ask those, which is, what if we do nothing here? What if we pull back from the product or the project? What if we just coast? Well, the answer to that is often the scariest possible thing, both on an individual's personal trajectory, because as we discussed, there is no sideways in your personal life, in your career, in industry. You're either growing or shrinking. And it is the scariest thing on an enterprise level. Because the do nothing, the what if I do nothing answer means that by default, you will shrink. And that is the doomsday that you want to avoid, not the doomsday of, oh, what if this particular project or product fails? Walk them through the fuller set of questions. The fourth one, and this is kind of fun, we're going to do this together right now. So we're getting into immediate and individual right now. This sounds kind of silly. But what we know is that the single most effective way to regulate somebody's emotional and psychological state in the moment is breathing. There's a direct connection between our breathing and our parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system. So if somebody's anxious, if they're stressed, if they're spinning in their head, one of the fastest ways to bring somebody to a calm state where their heart rate lowers, their heart rate variability gets better, their blood pressure lowers, their cognitive function gets better, their anxiety and stress lowers almost immediately, and they're able to think and create on a whole different level, is a very simple breathing technique. We call it the 4-7-8. You inhale through your mouth for a count of 4. You pause at the top of the inhale for a count of 7. You exhale, you inhale through your nose. Count of 4, you pause, and then you exhale through your mouth for a count of 8. It sounds silly. How could this make a difference? But do that 5 times, and generally it will make a profound difference. If you're on a call and you have a customer, a client, or a vendor who's freaking out, and it's really stressful, and you're anxious and stressed out, and you kind of know that you're a little bit rattled, and you get off the call, and you're not really functioning the way you need to function, do a cycle of 5 of these. It will dramatically change your state very quickly. Let's just do that quickly together, right? I'll count you through it, right? And if you're rolling your eyes at this, roll all you want, and then do it at home. It works. So start with an inhale for 4 counts through the mouth. So inhale, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's that simple. It's literally that simple. This is why Eastern traditions of health and healing have actually incorporated the breath as one of the central mechanisms to rapidly regulate your body's systems for thousands of years, because it works. And it's also why it's now become a central part of every health and healing modality that deals with stress, anxiety, or cognitive dysfunction. And the last one is attentional training. And I could tell you that, this is a fancy word for a word that will probably, if you didn't like the breathing stuff, you're not going to like the other word, which is meditation, right? I do not know. I know a lot of founders. I know a lot of people who have innovated stunning, stunning things. Right now, I could probably tell you fewer than 5% of them who've done incredible things in the world and consistently take action. Fewer than 5% of them do not have some sort of mind-stilling practice. It is that profound and that important in rewiring, not just getting you out of that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state, but also getting you into a state where you can direct your attention where you want it, when you want it, and not be spinning and distracted all the time. 2, where you can drop destructive storylines, that mental chatter that spins in your head, by noticing that it's happening and choosing to let it go. And 3, where you can do something called open monitoring, which is actually expanding your awareness so that you can take in more data than the typical person around you takes in, and thereby make much better and more effective decisions because it's based on a bigger data set, right? This is why so many people who are the top performers in their field, across every field right now, do this practice, because it matters that much. And because when you are stepping out into the space of the abyss to try and make effective change, this helps you. It helps you be okay. It helps you breathe. It helps you be better at your job and do what you're here to do. So don't just define your transformational vision. Equip your teams, equip yourself with the mindset toolkit to really make it happen. That's what I got for you. Questions? You guys, Daniel's was like, the bar is open after this, so no questions. Awesome.
We got one in the back there.
Cool. We'll start back there and then come up here. Yeah. When did I start to learn about breath as a tool? 25 years ago. So at the end of, or the beginning of the 2000s, I owned a yoga center in Hell's Kitchen, New York City, and spent years studying Eastern philosophy and healing modalities. And I've always been fascinated by what is the Western overlay, what's the science behind all of these things. And over the last 2.5 decades, there are reams and reams of now like published peer-reviewed data and science that shows how profoundly effective this ridiculously simple mode of intervention is. And there are like so many different types of breathing exercises now. People are doing this other thing called the physiological sigh, which can give you a similar effect. It's super simple. It's kind of like you take a big breath in, and then another inhale at the top of the breath and go. So it's like, I don't like to teach that in a room of a lot of people because there's a slight possibility that you may hyperventilate and pass out, and I don't want that happening. So, but it's amazing how much the science is catching up to something that seems so simple that it couldn't possibly do anything real. Turns out it does. So, yeah. Yeah. Yes. So the question is, how do you make your employees follow the vision of the entrepreneur? You have a clear idea, you share it with them, and how do you actually get them to buy into it? I'm actually going to push back a little bit on one of the things that you said, which is that you have a clear idea and you communicate it. Most entrepreneurs, most founders, and most leaders do not. The idea is muddy, it's complicated, it's not clear at all, and even if it is, they communicate it terribly. I would almost look back at the 5 elements of the BHAG, right? And say, like, am I communicating this in a way where it is catalytic, where there's a strong sense of purpose attached to it, where it's audacious, where people get behind this and say, if we can pull this off, this may not only change my life, this may change the world. This may change the community. This may change the lives of people I care about. Go through those 5 different elements and to almost use it as like a little bit of a litmus test to say, does it actually meet up to this? Because if you do that, a lot of times people will nod along and say, yeah, this is terrifying and I'm down for it. Like, that doesn't still mean that they have the skills and practices to be okay in it. We still have to actually give that to them. But if you want buy-in from the beginning, what I've seen is the biggest problem is not that people don't buy in. It's that the person conveying the idea isn't doing a good job of telling the story in the right way. We are sense-making beasts. And the best way for us to actually make sense and buy into something is with a story, right? So I'll tell you a really short story. Research done by Adam Grant, University of Pennsylvania. So he was looking at call center employees. Now, basically, you're dialing for dollars all day long. This is a job which is notoriously burnout-oriented, huge turnover. People don't buy into it. They hate the fact that they feel like they're calling and saying, can I have your money? And just pestering people all day long. Right? There's no sense of purpose. And if anything, they're being like rejected and told, like called all sorts of terrible things all day long. So there's a call center like that to raise scholarship money at the university. So they did this intervention where they basically took, I think it was 5 or 6 students, first-generation college attendees, and they brought them in to spend 5 minutes each telling the story to the call center employees, sharing how like nobody in their family had ever actually gotten a degree. This was going to change not only their lives, but this would create generational change in their families for years and years and years and years to come. They just told those stories. That's all they did. The employees weren't told anything else, right? All they did was hear the stories, told first person in a compelling way. Students left. Over the next, I think it was about 3 months or so, they measured the effectiveness and how much money the students generated and the sense of purpose and motivation and energy that it brought to it. Transformed. Money was through the roof. They were raising exponentially more money. They were showing up and feeling like they had a stronger sense of purpose. They were different on the phone in a whole bunch of different ways. They weren't trained to be different. They weren't using different scripts. What happened was they figured out how to tell the story of what they were doing in a way where people could really understand how meaningful it was, transfer into it. They made it catalytic, and that transformed everything. So my take is actually that very often when we can't get buy-in into a goal or a vision or something like that, it's not on them, it's on us. Like, we need to understand, how do we tell the story of this in a way that makes them say, where do I line up? So, anything else? Cool, thank you.